It is Crisis Club Monday, the weekly segment on the Amateur Hour Sports Podcast, where we go over the biggest teams in crisis for that week. And I'm very sick, and I have been very sick over the last few days, so I'm only going to do one team today. And even though they may not be in the biggest crisis mode in the world, I'm going to be talking about the Toronto Maple Leafs and how abysmal they have been when they're playing inside their division. And it's a hotly contested division. The Leafs are sitting third in the division. Bit of a gap between them and the Lightning now. I thought that they would be able to continue that good form and challenge the Lightning for that second spot, but that is definitely not the case at this point. But 56 games played, 66 points in third place. Like I said, the Panthers have 64 points, but have only played 54 games, so they could easily pass Toronto there. And Montreal is heating up a little bit, only 5 points back of the Leafs for that third spot, but they played one more game. So it's really close, and every point is going to matter as we get near to the end of the season. Obviously, there's quite a lot of games left, as there's 82 games in the NHL season, but the Leafs have been awful, and it's a close division, and they've been awful against the Atlantic this year. And I'm just going to go over their record against each of the Atlantic. So, start with Boston. They've actually beaten Boston, so they have 1 win, 2 losses against Boston. Still losing record. Against Tampa, they have no wins, 1 loss. Losing record again there. Florida, 0 wins, 2 losses. So a team that you are really challenging for that third spot in the Atlantic, 0-2 against that team. The Canadiens, 0 wins, 1 loss, 2 overtime losses. And the Leafs' last game was that overtime loss to the Canadiens. That is a game you should be winning, to be quite frank, especially when you're up. The Sabres, 2 wins, 1 loss. So winning record finally there. Ottawa, 2 wins, 0 losses. Detroit, 3 wins, 0 losses. So they only have winning records against the bottom 3 teams in the Atlantic. And I don't really count Detroit because you could probably go to the local YMCA and find a hockey team good enough to beat the Detroit Red Wings this season. So what this tells you is that in the closely contested games, the playoff defining games, to get to the playoffs, the Leafs are seriously struggling. Whether it comes to the Panthers, whether it comes to the Sabres, and they're really struggling against first-round matchups and second-round matchups, which would likely be against the Lightning and the Bruins in the playoffs. So they don't match up well against those guys when it comes to playing against them in the playoffs, and if they can even get there because their record is so bad against the Panthers and the Canadiens, who are right around them in the Atlantic. They've been on a bit of a rough stretch recently. Freddie Anderson has faded off to a degree. They're starting to. Well, we knew the defensive deficiencies, and they're really starting to get highlighted over the last. I guess since the start of 2020, that really needs to be cleaned up. Like 2 games ago against the Ducks with such a heavy lead, and then just letting them turn around and managing to scrape out the win. With 6 seconds left in OT. This isn't the make for a team that, like I thought, that was going to make a good playoff run this year. At least get to the second round. Because they may not even get to the playoffs. And it's a bit scary to think about that. Because, I know people who think that playoffs is going to be a big problem. Getting to the playoffs is going to be a big problem for the Toronto Maple Leafs. But I always thought that they would get there. But they've conceded the 3rd most in the Atlantic. They've conceded 1 less than the Senators. Detroit doesn't count again because they're so god awful that I'm not even going to consider them at 213 goals against. So the defensive deficiencies are certainly a problem, and I think that acquiring a guy like Jack Campbell in that trade, the Leafs acquired Jack Campbell and Kyle Clifford for Trevor Moore. That was a good move. Because Campbell has looked good in spells for the Kings, and we definitely needed a backup better than Michael Hutchinson. So great move there by Dubas. Some guys that he has experience with in the past. So good move there. But it's not looking fantastic for the Leafs right now. And I think that they're going to start to address the issues going around. I think that the trade that we just made was good even to get Kyle Clifford. He seems to be really bought into the Toronto system. He seems to be really happy that he got traded to Toronto. And you kind of need that sandpaper type of player in your lineup. And I think that Kyle Clifford can really offer that. And then Jack Campbell thing, again, I'm very happy with that part of the deal. But the form needs to improve, and they really need to start getting those results against the Panthers and the Canadiens and start turning around their fortunes against the Lightning and the Bruins. It's going to come down to their records against teams in their division, because it's so abysmal right now, sitting at, because they are still losing the game. That puts them at 8-9 in terms of just straight win-loss in that regard. So when you want to be one of the better teams in your division, and you think that you are one of the better teams in your division, if not the conference, if not the entire NHL, you need to be playing better against the teams that are battling with you to not only get to the playoffs, but get to the conference final once you actually reach the playoffs. And the way the Leafs are performing against the teams in their conference doesn't bode well for a team that wants to make the playoffs and one that wants to go far in the playoffs, because Leafs fans are getting a little bit frustrated with what we've seen in the last couple of years. 2 winnable series against Boston, and you would have liked to have at least won one of those series. We understand the Capitals series was, it is what it is. That one, we didn't think we'd win that, but certainly last year that should have been a win, especially going back to the Scotiabank Arena in Game 6 with the series on the line, and you could have wrapped it up, and they didn't play well, and then they lost Game 7. Another heartbreaker there. So it's getting a little frustrating, and I think that a lot of it is down to Sheldon Keefe had to mop up a lot of the mess that Mike Babcock made, and I'm excited to see a full season with Sheldon Keefe, but this season isn't a complete write-off, and I think that it would be a complete failure to still miss the playoffs, because it doesn't seem like the wild card is going to come from the Atlantic. So the Leafs really need to clean themselves up against their division, and really just, in any sense, it could get better, but it especially needs to improve against the Atlantic. And that will wrap up this episode. Again, apologies that it's very short. I've been really sick, but nothing stops the daily uploads every day since September 20th, since episode 23. There's been a daily episode from the Amateur Sports Podcast. So if you like that daily content, stick around for it. Every single day, we'll put out an episode. If you want to stay up to date with those episodes, follow us on Twitter and Instagram at AmateurPDC. Subscribe on YouTube, follow on Spotify, follow on Apple Podcasts, and let me know if there's any other crisis clubs that you thought would have been on this week if we had done a complete episode. Thanks for listening. We will see you tomorrow.